Hiya! In this lesson, we will be discussing how to use value and contrast together in art, and then we'll show an exercise that uses the two concepts to create lighting and form. Value in art describes how light or dark your colors are. Contrast is the arrangement of opposite elements or effects. Being able to effectively manipulate these aspects will help you to render more believable pieces with strong definition, control the mood, and control how the viewer's eye moves through a piece. Let's look at these two photos as an example. If we take the brightest highlight and the darkest shadow in each photo and create a gradient, you can see the values they use. The one on the left has a lot more midtones than the one on the right here. What that means is that the left photo has a lot more values to work with. This leads to a more defined shape and stronger lighting. The rose itself utilizes a lot of the lighter values, which helps separate it from its very dark background. And because the jump between these two values is so vast, it creates a contrast which draws the viewer's eye straight to the subject. But it also uses some really dark values in the center of the rose to stop all the petals from blending in with each other. Meanwhile, let's look at the photo on the right here. While there is still contrast between the rose and the background in this photo, it's not as strong as the photo on the left, and the rose has to fight a bit more to get your attention, not to mention it's not as easy to pick out each individual petal. Being able to create a wide range of values in your artwork can take a bit of practice though. Sometimes when you're first starting out, it can be a bit difficult to figure out how far you can push your values before it starts to make the piece look too heavy. So here's a small exercise to help push yourself to get good contrast between your values. Before we get started, in the description is a link to download a folder. In the folder are the reference images we're going to use. When you are still practicing your painting skills for how to get good contrast in your values, it's a good idea to use a reference that uses simple shapes like these. One, because the shapes are so simple, you can focus on your values in developing your painting techniques without getting too frustrated about the form, the composition, or the texturing. Two, understanding how these kinds of shapes interact with light will help you later on when you're drawing more complex objects. For instance, a building is just a rectangular prism with details extruded in and out. A person is a series of cylinders, spheres, and boxes stacked together. Nailing the form and shading of these kinds of shapes will help your hand develop muscle memory for when you do more complicated pieces. Now let's go ahead and open up one of our images here in Photoshop. So once I have this image open in Photoshop, I'm going to want to create my canvas that I'll be doing my recreation on. In order to create a canvas that's the right size though, I need the dimensions from this piece here. So rather than going into image size, and trying to remember all those numbers, I'm just going to go to Command or Control A, then Command or Control C, and then Command or Control D. And then with the way Photoshop works is if you have copied something like an image to your clipboard, it will remember or be able to grab those settings. So you can see over here, it has clipboard highlighted, and these are all of the dimensions of this image here. I'm not going to change anything. If you want to change what color your background is, you can do that here. Some people prefer working on a black canvas. I think I'm going to leave mine as white, and I'm not going to change anything else, and then I'm going to hit create. So now I have these two documents, and if I had an extra screen, I could always open up this image on that extra screen and use that as a reference while I'm drawing in this document. But if you're limited with the amount of screens you have or your screen size, what you can do is, in order to have these documents open in the viewport at the same time, is you can go to Window, Arrange, and then there are a bunch of different options here you can pick from. I'm going to go with 2-up vertical. And now I have both documents open, so I can go to this one and have the other one open while I try and sketch everything out. Now, some people have a really good eye and they can just automatically start drawing and painting directly from the reference. I sometimes need a little bit of help, especially with something that has such precise edges on it like this. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on a grid so that way I can break the image down into smaller parts and I can just focus on individual sections as I'm drawing. So I'm just going to click in my workspace over here so that way this document is active, and then I'm going to go to View, Show, and Grid, and you should see a grid pop up. Now if you want to change the spacing of your grid lines or the color or anything like that, what you can do is go into your preferences. On a Mac, you just click on Photoshop and preferences is going to be listed there. On a Windows computer, preferences will be under Edit. And then you just go to Guides, Grid, and Slices. And you have all these different settings you can change. All the settings related to our grid are right here. So you can pick the color of your lines from here. You can change the style of the lines right here. You can change how many lines there are. You can change the measurement right here. And you can even add subdivisions to your grid lines. For this project, I'm going to do a grid line every 2 inches. That gives me decently sized squares where they're not so big that there's a whole bunch of information packed into them, and they're not so little that there's a whole bunch of squares that I'll have a tough time keeping track of. I'm going to leave the subdivisions at 1. I'll leave the line alone, but I will change the color of my line, because if you're working with a grayscale image or working with an image that doesn't have a whole lot of color, you don't exactly want to use a gray grid line. So I think I'm going to go with green so that way I can actually see it on the document here. And then once I'm happy with it, I'm just going to hit OK. And now if I click in this work area and go to View, Show, Grid, you can see it's going to use the exact same grid that is being used over here. And a nice thing is, as long as you pay attention to the magnification down at the bottom here, as you zoom in, you can always keep your grid marks aligned. Something else that comes in handy when drawing are guides. So if you hit Command or Control R, for both of the documents, you'll see a ruler appear. Now, let's say you're wanting to recreate the top of the cylinder here. Now you can eyeball it and say, oh, that goes up to about 1/4 of the square over here. You can eyeball it, or what you can do is if I go up here to this ruler, click inside the ruler and then drag down, I can create a guide. And because these documents are the same magnification, I can go over to my second document to grab the guide and drag it down to match up with the one over here. Now it does get a little tricky if you want to put in a vertical guide. What you have to do is as you click and drag your line, you'll see a number appear showing what the coordinate is. What you have to do is just pay attention to whatever that coordinate is. And then when you click and drag over here, you just have to make sure that you match it up. Okay, now if you temporarily want to hide your guides, just go to View, Show, and then go to Canvas Guides. And you'll notice that if you have guides active on your document, it'll have a check mark next to it. Just hit Canvas Guides, and those guides will temporarily disappear. Now if you want to bring them back, just go to View, Show, Canvas Guides, and it'll bring them right back. Now if you want to clear the Canvas Guides completely from your document, you can just go to View and then Clear Guides. Another way to add a guide is to just go to View and New Guide. And this is a good way for if you have trouble getting the guide exactly where you want it to go. You can just go to that View New Guide and put the position you want to add it, tell it whether it needs to be horizontal or vertical. Then when you hit OK, it'll add the guide exactly where you want it to go. So I'm going to go ahead and add this guide back here. And I'm going to go ahead and add a guide to both documents that lays out where the cylinder ends at the bottom here. And again, in order to do this trick where I line the guides up in both documents, you have to make sure that they're the same magnification. And again, you can check that by going down to the bottom. As you can see right now, I have them both set to 100%. But if I were to zoom in, it's a good idea to make sure they're both at the same magnification. Something else I'm going to do is to help me kind of keep track of where I am on the grid. On this document here, I'm going to make a new layer. And then with my brush tool, I'm just going to grab a bright color here. And then I'm just going to number these off. So that way when I'm zoomed in, it'll be a little easier to tell where I'm at in the document. And I'm going to go over to this document as well, make a new layer, and add those same numbers. Okay, so I don't have to worry about really locking any layers on this document because I'm not drawing anything, but on this one, for the layer that I added my numbers, I'm going to go to where it says lock, and I'm going to hit that very last option so that way I don't accidentally draw anything on this layer. Then from here, I'm just going to make a new layer, and I'm going to start drawing. Now something to keep in mind is you don't want to go straight into grabbing the right colors and trying to get the right shapes and then coloring them in, adding the shading, things like that. You want to hold up on that for right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a color here. And the first thing I want to do is I actually want to get just the basic sketch down. The sketch helps you get the layout and the composition of your piece right, and you can quickly get that done. And if something's not right, you wouldn't have spent hours trying to detail this one part of the cube. You can just quickly erase those lines and quickly redraw them so that way they're the right proportion or they're at the right angle, whatever you need to do. So before I start adding in solid colors, I'm just going to do a very basic sketch. And I already have my guides and my grid laid out, so I know that this is where the cylinder starts and this line is going to be where it ends, and then this is how far I need to curve up. Now I think I'm going to add an extra guide to tell me how wide I need to make that face. And then from here I can just zoom in. And now I can add the sketch of the cylinder here. If you have an issue where as you're drawing, your brush jumps to that line, go ahead and just go to View and turn off Snap. That's great if you're doing something that needs to follow those guides, the grid lines. But for a lot of what we're doing, everything's just going to be a little bit off, and it's going to be real annoying if our brush keeps jumping to those lines. So again, to stop that from happening, just go to View and Snap. And another technique for when you're drawing is sometimes right side up is not the best angle to draw at. Sometimes you would just like to rotate it like a piece of paper without having to worry about editing the document. What you can do is if you hit R on your keyboard, it brings up the Rotate Canvas tool, and that allows you to rotate the canvas to whatever angle you want, or whatever angle makes it more comfortable to draw. And then when you're done, you just go back to the rotate canvas tool, hit reset view, and it puts it right side up again. So I think I'm going to make my brush just a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to give this another try here. Now what I'm paying attention to is when I'm making this curve, I'm trying to pay attention to how much empty space is in here. So I know it touches down about right there. And the line just slowly goes up to kiss that guide there. And then I can just keep drawing to get everything I need. There we go. Now I have the top face here, and I can always add some more adjustments when I start to add in my solid colors. So now I just move this up. And I know the side of the cylinder follows this line, so I'm just going to quickly add this. And again, I'm not looking to make this super pretty right now. I just need a basic guide. And then I know it touches about here. And I can't see the corners of my cylinder here, but I do know that it has a circular face to it, so I'm just kind of guesstimating where things need to go. I do know that the highest point of the curve does kiss that guide. So I'm just going to do this. Then I can use my eraser tool to touch things up. Now I can start adding my other shapes here. So I'm going to go ahead and clear my guides on both documents. And I'm going to do the same thing for the sphere here. I'm going to put my guides where they need to go. And if you grab your move tool, you can readjust guides. You just need to grab your move tool and hover over them. And again, because these documents have the same magnification and I have them lined up side to side, I can just drag the blue line down to meet this. And then for the vertical ones, I just need to remember what the number is. And now from here, I can start adding in my sketch. Okay, so now I've added a guide at each of the corners for the top face. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click, hold shift, and then click at the next corner. And I'm going to keep doing that until I've gone the entire way around the top face. If you want to get a super straight line that's not just up and down or left and right, what you can do is with your paintbrush, just click where you want the line to start, hold shift, and then click where you want it to end, and Photoshop will automatically connect those 2 points. Now this behavior can work a bit funky if you have pen pressure turned on. It has a tendency to taper the line. So if you want a solid connecting line, just go to your brush settings and turn off pen pressure. Because I'm just doing a rough sketch right now, I'm not too worried about the quality of the line. I just want to get it down so I can see it when I go on to the next step. Also, if you want to make a perfectly straight line going up and down or left to right, just click and hold shift as you drag your paintbrush down, and I'll give you the nice straight line. And here's my sketch. I went ahead and added in just a general placement for where some of the shadows need to go. And if I needed to make any adjustments to proportions or layout, I would do that now because the sketch only took me a few minutes and it would only take me a little bit more to kind of fix anything up. Now I have a general idea of where everything needs to go, I can start adding in my solid shapes and then add shading and things like that. And since I have the layer system here in Photoshop, I don't have to go in and just add a new layer and then add my entire piece to that one layer. Some people work well with that method. I like to use my layers, and when I go in to start painting things, I want to put the cylinder on its own layer, I'll put the sphere on its own layer, and then the cube on its own layer, and then I'll add shadows in the background to their own separate layers as well. That way, if I need to make adjustments or as I'm adding the shading and coloring, it's going to be a lot easier adding those things because I'll only have to worry about how they affect the one object. I won't have to be careful, like when I add the shadow right here, I won't have to be careful about going over the corner of my cube here. I can just go with my paintbrush up and down to get the right smoothness or to get the right color, but because I'll put my cube on a separate layer, I don't have to worry about coloring over it. So first off is I think I'm going to start off with my cylinder. So I'm just going to make a new layer. And I'm going to put my sketch at the top of my layer list, but I'm going to put the opacity down on it so that way I can have it overlaid my other layers. And I'm also going to turn this last lock option on so I don't accidentally add any of my painting to this layer. So back on my cylinder layer, I'm just going to go back over here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my grids back on. So that way I can tell kind of how far shadows need to reach, or if I need to touch up any of the shapes, I can do that as I'm painting. So for right now, I'm going to just grab a base color. I'm not going to be worried about the shading quite yet. I just want to get the very basic shape. So I'm just going to grab one base color. And because the sides of a cylinder are super straight, I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool, which is that second tool up here. And I'm just going to go here and here. I might have to shift this. There we go. I'm just going to go straight down to here. Then I will nudge this over. And then I can just fill it up with my paint bucket tool. Now give me nice straight edges on the sides here, and I can just go in with my paintbrush to fill in this curved part. I'm not really worried too much about what's going over here because those parts are going to be covered by the other primitives we have in the shot. So I'm just really worried about what we're actually going to see, and I can turn off my sketch layer real quick to see what my edge is doing. Now because there's a very hard edge on this cylinder here, I think I'm going to actually make a new layer and just name it cylinder top. That'll just make it easier to 1, shade the side, and then 2, shade the top or add any coloring to the top. And I think I'm actually going to grab my elliptical marquee tool to make it. I'm just going to get like the general shape of it, and then I'll just move it down. And as long as you have the marquee tool still selected, you can move your selection around without worrying about it moving anything on the canvas. It's when you have your move tool selected that it will start moving content around. So I got the basic shape that I want on there, so I'm just going to grab my eyedropper tool. The shortcut for that is I. And then I'm just going to use that color that I sampled to fill in this top. And then I can hit Command or Control D to get rid of the selection. And if I need to nudge the size, I can just hit Command or Control T. And I can just adjust it as need be. In order to change the size out of proportion, you have to hold Shift when you're working with the tool. Otherwise, it's just going to scale it proportionally. I don't want that, so I'm holding Shift as I work with this. Might have to bring this in a little bit more. There we go. And I know I grabbed this color by using the color picker, but I think I'm just going to grab a lighter version of it because it does look a lot lighter in the photo than what it grabbed. Now it could be that I just happened to pick on a dark pixel because there is some smudging on the top here. Or what's happening is because the background's so dark, it's making this look lighter. Whereas, even though this is technically the same color, because my background is so light, it looks way dark. But I can always adjust this later, so I'm just going to pick a lighter gray. Maybe not quite that light. There, I think that's a little bit more appropriate. Okay. And then for organization's sake, I'm going to select cylinder top and cylinder, and then I'm just going to put it into a group by hitting that folder down in the layers panel. Next, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the sphere here. For this, I'm going to grab the elliptical marquee tool, and I'm just going to, since I know the sides of this should be even, I'm going to make a new layer. And with my elliptical marquee tool, I'm just going to try and get in the center here, and then hold Alt or Option plus Shift. And I'm going to try and get the basic shape here and then move the selection. Alright, now on this new layer I just made, I will grab a base color and then fill in my sphere. Now I'm going to move on to my cube. And this is another shape that I'm probably going to use multiple layers to do it. So for this one, I'm going to do cube top. And in order to get these nice straight lines, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my lasso tool. It's usually going to be your third tool from the top. And I'm going to grab my polygonal lasso tool. So then I'm just going to click on one corner, click the other, get the third one, fourth, and then go back to the beginning. You know you're at the beginning because that little zero or the little circle will appear next to the icon. And then once I click back to the beginning, it'll create my selection. I can just sample the color I want to use my paint bucket to color it, then hit Command or Control D. And then I will go down and make cube left. And this will be my left, not the cube's actual left. I'm going to make sure that's underneath the top side here. And I'm going to switch back to my polygonal lasso tool. I'm going to click one corner here, one corner here. And I'm actually going to go a little bit above than what I actually need. That way when I go to add my coloring, there's not going to be a minuscule gap between the two sides. So I'm going to go a little bit higher than I need. I'm going to make sure that line is still going through the corner though. Then I'm going to hit that and this. And then I just use my eyedropper tool to sample my color, grab my paint bucket tool, and there we go. So I'll do that for one more side. So I'm going to go to a corner, go to the other corner. And then again, I'm going to go a little bit higher than what I need to. Go to this corner and here. Then I'll just sample. There we go. Alright, so right now I've just got the very basic colors down. Now I can start to add my shading. Again, I'm going to go back to the cylinder here. I think I'm going to clean up that bottom down there, but before I do that, I'm going to throw all my cube parts into a folder. Just so that way my layer panel is just a little bit organized. But I'm going to go back to my cylinder, find the side. And I'm just going to use my elliptical marquee tool. Just kind of add a bit of a smoother curve. Oop. There we go. Oop. I need to make sure that I grab the right color first. There we go, that's a bit of a smoother curve. Okay, so now before I go in and I start coloring things, I'm going to add the shading to the side here first. And so I'm going to make sure that layer is selected. And then under my lock options, I'm going to hit this first lock. And now, when I get my shading color, and I'm making the shading color a little darker than what I actually grabbed, because what I like to do is I actually like to turn the opacity down on my paintbrush. And you can get to that by going up to the top here. And then I make a big brush, I give it a fuzzy edge. And I'll give that a try. It's a little darker than I want. There we go. And I'm just going to add a really base coat, and then I'll go in again with the paintbrush. And each time I go in, it's just making the shading a little bit darker. And the reason I'm going up and down for these next few strokes is because if you kind of look at the lighting over here, there's a little bit of fuzz kind of on this side going left to right, but mostly the shadows are creating kind of hard lines. So that's why I'm just trying to go in the same direction as my shape here. And if you want, you can tie your opacity to your pen pressure. You just have to go up to the top here and click this button and it will activate that function. Okay, and then I'm not just going to add shadows. I am going to add some highlights as well. So I'm just going to grab a color from here. I'm going to go lighter, because again, I'm using a low opacity brush. And then I'm just going to paint it in a similar way, where each time I layer the brush, it adds more of the paint down, or you see more of it. Since I'm using a lighter color, I'm going to up the opacity a little bit. And there is a bit of a light coming off of this other side, so I'm just going to go over here and lighten this up a bit. There we go. There we go. Now, if you have an issue where you just can't get things to blend like you like, there are a couple methods to kind of help your colors blend. You can either use your smudge tool, which is over here. It's the icon that looks like a finger dragging across the surface. If you can't find it, look for your blur and sharpen tool, and then just right click on those and you'll find the smudge tool. That lets you kind of blend things together. You can change the strength of it by going up to the top here, and you can smudge things together a little bit. The thing to keep in mind when you're using the smudge tool is save right before you use it, and then save periodically while you're using it, because sometimes, depending on how high you have the strength set to, it can take a lot of computing power, and that can kind of lock up Photoshop and make it crash. Photoshop does have a recovery feature, but it doesn't always recover at the exact point it crashed. Sometimes it can be a few strokes or a few steps back. So it's just important to save often when you are using the smudge tool. Another option is if you hold Command or Control and then click on the thumbnail, It'll create a selection of around whatever is on that layer. And then you can go to filter, blur, and I usually hit Gaussian blur. That's another way to kind of help smooth out your blending. So I'm not going to smooth out too much because I actually kind of like having that painterly feel to it. And then you can just go back and continue painting, add any adjustments, things like that. Okay, now that I kind of have the shapes shaded the way I want, I can go in and start in on the background. So I'm just going to go to the bottom here, and I'm actually going to get rid of this background layer here. And I'm going to add a new layer. And I've got my canvas and my picture lined up here and they're the same magnification. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool. And on this layer here, I'm just going to rename that ground. I'm going to add some guides that way I can see where it is a bit more. Then I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool and I'm just going to select the area that I need for my ground, grab my color picker, and fill it in. From there I can use the same coloring techniques that I've been doing for the rest of the piece here. I need to make sure that I add shadows, not just like where this big shadow is right here and here, but I also need to make sure I add little dark shadows directly underneath the shape, so that way they won't look like they're floating in open air. Now, if you ever need to modify a selection, if you hold Alt or Option, that lets you use the tool to subtract from the selection. If you want to add onto it, you can hold Shift, and that lets you add onto it. So I just needed to trim off this little area over here, so I just held Alt or Option on my keyboard and made the selection of the part that I didn't want to keep, and it got rid of it. Okay, and then for this back piece, I'm just going to make a new layer again, except I'm going to put it underneath my ground layer. This is going to be backing. And then an easy way to get what's happening in the background here is probably just a gradient. So I'm just going to grab one end, switch over, and then grab this end. And the way that I've been switching between my foreground and background colors so quickly is if you hit X on your keyboard, that switches them. So now that I have those two colors, I'm going to go to my gradient tool, which should be G on your keyboard. If that doesn't bring it up, just hit Shift and keep hitting G until it does. So the tool's right here. I'm going to go to this drop-down menu and go to the basics, and usually this first one just automatically uses your foreground and background color. And then I just make sure that I have a linear gradient, which is that first option there. And I just click and drag. I can hold Shift to make a straight line. And I've got my gradient. Now if I clear my guides and get rid of my grid, then you can see my creation versus the photo. I think I might go back over to this side and make it a bit darker. There we go. I think that looks a little bit closer, and I'll call it good. Now there's a second photo still left in the folder, so why don't you open up that one and give that recreation a shot. So remember, it's not always best to just jump into a piece and start painting away. Sometimes it's better to start off with a sketch. That way you can check your composition, the layout, your proportions, and you can make sure they're right before you start spending hours and hours on your piece. You can do a quick 5-minute sketch and then touch up that sketch where you need to, and then you can start adding in your base colors and then add in the finer details. So go ahead with your recreation and feel free to kind of experiment with some of the tools and some of the different brushes in Photoshop. Good luck!